Hello and welcome to the next chapter of the competitive biography of Emanuel Lasker. Following Lasker's convincing match win over Henry Bird, he traveled to the city of Manchester, which was the hometown of the man who was quite possibly the strongest player in all of England, Joseph Henry Blackburn. Now, whether Lasker immediately issued a formal challenge to Blackburn upon his arrival in Manchester remains somewhat unclear and would actually cause a little bit of controversy that we'll talk about in a few videos from now. But for the time being, Lasker had a more immediate arrangement with the gentleman currently sat across from him, Mr. Nicholas Miniati. Miniati was one of Manchester's strongest amateurs, having most of his experience come from the intercity club matches that he had been playing throughout the 1880s. Notably, in 1888, he was board 2 for the Manchester team in their match against Liverpool. He lost against Amos Byrne, but I mean, who doesn't? That's hardly a bad result. In terms of proper tournament experience, Miniati recently played at the Hauptturnier of the Amsterdam 1889 tournament, where he finished third. So there's actually a non-zero chance that Miniati met Lasker at that tournament. He also played at the London 1889 tournament that Bird won, where he finished in shared third. So while he certainly has some tournament experience under his belt, I don't think we can quite yet call Miniati a master. And so I believe for the first time in this series, Lasker is playing a match against somebody against whom he is not the underdog. Now, the conditions of this match were fairly straightforward, a time control of once more 20 moves per hour, first to 3 wins as you can see below the camera. The first 2 draws would not count, however, the third and subsequent draws would count as a half point for each player. With all of the particulars out of the way, let's get into the game. For this first bout, Lasker has the white pieces and he returned to e4, and Miniati responds with the French defense, e6. d4, d5, knight to c3, knight to f6, and bishop to g5. And now, it was noted that bishop to e7 was the more common and apparently sounder move of the day, but Miniati's response, d captures on e4, initiating the so-called Byrne variation, is nowadays the most common response. And it's not a new move either. For example, at the Amsterdam tournament, Isidor Gunsberg threw in a trade on f6 against Amos Byrne. Bishop captures f6, g captures f6, knight captures on e4, but this was immediately met with f5, knight to g3, and now the thematic c5 break. After knight to f3 and knight to c6, the players traded queens with d captures c5, queen captures d1, rook captures d1, and bishop captures on c5. Mr. Byrne would go on to win this game in 41 moves. Lasker correctly immediately recaptured on e4, and after knight b to d7, knight to f3, and here bishop to e7. Now, knight captures on f6 is the only objectively good move here. After knight captures on f6, bishop to d3, and short castles, here white has the option to play very ambitiously with queen to e2 and long castles. But in the game between another British amateur, Charles Locock, and Amos Byrne, the former instead exchanged again on f6. Bishop captures f6, bishop captures f6, and castles. Here Byrne once again broke with c5, and after d captures c5, bishop captures on b2. After rook to b1, this bishop moved back to f6, and Byrne won this game in only 30 moves. As far as games Miniati has played, bishop captures on f6 is the only move he had ever faced, against George Gossip at the London 1889 tournament. After knight captures f6, knight captures f6, bishop captures on f6, bishop to d3, queen to d6, and both players castled. This was, all things considered, a successful opening for Miniati, who would go on to break with c5 and win this game in 34 moves. Rather than doing either of those, Lasker played the move knight e back to d2. Now, strictly speaking, this move is not good, but it serves the dual purpose of being a theoretical novelty for the time, and being a way to keep more pieces on the board. Now, in response to this novel position, Miniati plays the move a6. This was somewhat criticized for being slow. Miniati wants to develop his bishop to b7 after b6, but he doesn't want Lasker playing the move bishop to b5, which a6 stops. The point is that if you play b6 right away and white plays the move bishop to b5, you are certainly allowed to play bishop to b7, but it's also possible for black to fall into a trap by playing a6 now, where after knight to e5, you can't take this bishop because knight to c6 traps the queen. So Miniati played the move a6 so that now he's able to play b6 and fianchetto his bishop, but just in general at this time, this queenside fianchetto was generally frowned upon in the French. Now, consulting the databases, bishop to d3 was played in a 2012 game between Andre Oberhofer and Enrique Osuna Vega. Lasker chose to move his bishop one square less, he put it on e2. This move is a novelty, and so does as of move 8, that the players are playing a unique game. The players continued normally enough. Miniati played b6, Lasker castled, bishop to b7, c3, and castles for black. So strategically speaking, this opening seems to be a success for Miniati, who just needs to execute the c5 break to free up his position and claim at least equality, if not more. Lasker began this middle game by rerouting his knight to c4, and Miniati responded to this with knight to d5, offering a trade of the bishops. Now, the annotators of the day believed that bishop to d2 would give black a cramped game, but whoever was writing the notes clearly undervalued the break c5, after which black is definitely not cramped. So Lasker correctly exchanged on e7, bishop captures e7, queen captures e7, rook to e1, rook f to e8, and now knight f to e5. Now, black is totally within their rights to play knight captures e5, and after knight captures e5, play c5. This is still completely fine. It doesn't hit quite as hard as on d captures c5. There's no minor piece that can go to c5, so you would have to play queen captures on c5. And now white can play this move bishop to h5, tickle the f-pawn and force this rook to go to e8, at which point they're free to go back to f3, opposing black's bishop on the long diagonal, and this is just equal. Instead of that, Miniati also avoided a trade by playing knight back to f8, which is an amusingly Lasker-coded move. Lasker here played bishop to f3, which is a little bit of an annoying move for Miniati as c5 is prevented because Lasker is free to simply pick off the defender of the b6 pawn, knight captures b6, and white simply wins a pawn. So he instead played f6, kicking this knight down to d3, and as c5 is prevented, this bishop needs to be protected somehow, so Miniati played rook a to b8, now freeing up this knight to move. Lasker played queen to d2, and Miniati put his queen on f7, and after b4, we have the start of the provocative moves, g5. Certainly a dubious move in isolation, but both players have gotten what they evidently wanted, which is a sharp double-edged battle. Now this move is Miniati's 18th, so before we get into any concrete analysis of the position, I think it would be prudent for us to make the time control. For Lasker's 19th move, he continues his queenside expansion with a4, and after knight to g6, our subject makes the time control with the move bishop to h5. And it is right at the time control that Miniati is rewarded for his ambition, because this is a move that kills any of Lasker's objective advantage. A common saying in chess is that if you say A, you must say B, and so the correct move here is to play a5. Now, for example, black can play bishop to a8, creating another defender for the b6 pawn. But now bishop to h5 is quite strong. And the point here is that if we play the move that Miniati plays in the game, knight d to f4, then white is perfectly fine to play knight captures f4, g captures f4, and here a captures on b6. And the problem is that this pawn can't be recaptured as the c pawn has to defend the d6 square from an incoming knight fork. So white will take on c7 next, they've won a clean pawn and are completely happy. The problem with Lasker playing bishop to h5 right away is indeed Miniati gets to play this move knight d to f4, which is a very bold move to play right at the move 20 time control, but it is the best move in the position. Now, after knight captures f4 and g captures on f4, it's clear that Miniati wants to use the g file to attack Lasker's king, which works very well in tandem with his bishop here on b7 pointing at the g2 pawn. So it makes quite a bit of sense that Lasker tries to block this diagonal with f3, but now a very strong move from Mr. Miniati, e5, guarding the f4 pawn and gaining tempo on the currently unprotected knight, which now has to move. So Lasker retreats his knight to b2, and Miniati starts going on the g file with queen to g7, and after knight to d3, he plays a very impressive looking move, knight to h4. This rook cannot be taken, as of course knight to f3 check is threatened. Now Lasker defends in a very efficient way by playing queen to f2, getting out of the fork and attacking the knight, and we have a position where Miniati has exactly one move to keep the initiative on his side. So what I want you to do, pause the video, see if you can find the move that Miniati has at his disposal to keep his impressive attack going. All right, 3, 2, One, if you came across the move queen to g5, then congratulations, you have found the correct move. The point here is that after bishop captures on e8, knight captures f3 check comes anyways. King to h1, knight captures e1, rook captures e1, rook captures e8, and now white does manage to take advantage of this pinned e-pawn by playing knight captures on f4. Material is equal, but white is still the one defending because black can keep up the pressure with, for example, king to h8, rook to g8, and white still can't breathe easy. Unfortunately, Miniati did not find the move queen to g5. He instead played knight to g6, which doesn't lose anything except the initiative. Now it's Lasker's turn. Lasker started by trading on e5, d captures e5, f captures e5, and now finally he said b with a5. Trying to deal with this pressure on the b pawn, Miniati took advantage of the once again undefended knight by playing rook b to d8, but Lasker simply defended this with rook a to d1, and Miniati used his active rook and put it on d6. Now, continuing the trend of finding aggressive and really mobile moves, a really cool move that Miniati could play in this position is e4. Now, if this knight moves anywhere, really anywhere, the point is that it no longer looks at the c5 square, and so black would be well within their rights to play b captures on a5. So white is really incentivized to trade on e4. So f captures e4, rook captures e4, rook captures e4, bishop captures on e4. This does lose a pawn for black. A captures b6, c captures b6, and queen captures on b6. However, black does have sufficient compensation if and only if they find a somewhat tricky move, I suppose, knight back to f8. Now the point here is that you ensure that if this rook is taken, it is not with check, and that gives black time to play queen captures on g2, which would of course be checkmate. White can defend against this by playing knight captures on f4, and after rook captures d1, bishop captures d1, queen captures on c3. Now the point is that queen to e1 with checkmate is threatened. And there are a few ways that white can defend this, but for example, if they move the queen, then they drop the b pawn. If they move the bishop, then queen to c1 check is threatened, which might pick up the knight. You can also just play against this pinned bishop anyways if you want to play queen to c1. Regardless, black has either the ability to regain the pawn with material equality or sufficient compensation. Miniati's move of rook to d6 isn't necessarily bad, it's just a little bit more passive. After a captures b6 and c captures on b6, he is somewhat rewarded, however, as Lasker played the move queen to c2. Now this does add pressure to Miniati's knight, as this knight is looking to move. However, Miniati is just in time to liquidate. Manchester's hometown hero doubled on the d file with rook e to d8, and after knight to b2, traded off all the rooks. Rook d1, rook d1, rook d1, queen d1, and finally played the move that showcases why everything is completely equal, queen to c7. Now, one could claim that Lasker has some advantage in this endgame due to his better pawn structure, having only 2 pawn islands in exchange for Miniati's 3, but the problem is that this backwards c-pawn is going to give him trouble for the rest of the game. Now, trying to play for any sort of piece imbalance with bishop captures on g6 won't really lead to anything. H captures g6, queen to d3 does poke this pawn, but black plays king to g7, and without wanting to get too deep into the weeds, I will say that this endgame is completely fine for black. Lasker instead played queen to d3 right away, but this knight is no longer pinned to anything, and it's free to simply retreat to e7. Lasker improved his bishop to g4, and Miniati put his on d5, cutting off the queen's advance on the d file, and Lasker improved his king to f2. Miniati locked down the pawn structure with b5, and after bishop to f5, Miniati took, knight captures f5, queen captures d5 with check, king to g7, and now knight to d3. Now Lasker is offering up the c3 pawn. It doesn't really matter whether or not you take it. If queen captures on c3, then Lasker can simply take on e5 with check. Queen captures e5, knight captures e5, and this is just a dead-drawn knight endgame. Miniati instead played knight to e3, which accomplishes more or less the same thing. Lasker still took on e5, queen captures e5, queen captures e5, knight captures e5, but Miniati chooses to regain his pawn in a different way. Knight d1 check, king to e2, and knight captures on c3 check. Now, this could be seen as a slightly inferior variation, as it activates Lasker's king for him, as he's able to get his king up to d3, but Miniati has it all under control. He played knight to d5, immediately attacking the b4 pawn and forcing Lasker to play the move knight to c6 defending, and now Miniati continues activating his own king with king to f6. We have king to d4 and now knight to e3 hitting the g2 pawn. Lasker responds in kind with knight to b8, and after knight captures g2, knight captures a6, Miniati played the move king to f5, and it was here on move 47 that the players agreed to a draw. As black is going to win white's f-pawn, white is going to win black's b-pawn, both players are going to queen at the same time, and we will again have a completely drawn endgame. So that's the first game of this new match in the books, far from the most accurate game we have seen or will see in this series, but as is fairly characteristic for the first game in a match, I think both players were simply feeling each other out. Lasker has now confirmed that his opponent is certainly a player who knows his stuff, and if he's able to find slightly more aggressive moves, he may prove to be quite a powerful opponent, but there's still more games that we can see to figure out if that's true or not. So, the match against Miniati is just getting started, neither player has scored their first win yet, and there's much more chess to come. I look forward to seeing you there, so until then.